Mass land destruction has been a contentious topic since the beginning of the format and now is hotter than ever. But today I'm here to contend that mass land destruction isn't the answer, but rather more like burning down the house for a wasp nest. While it's understandable, very understandable, there are better alternatives which we will go over if your playgroup is troubled by the mass ramp players. This is Jin with Next Level Commander. If you're familiar with the format and are looking to take it one step further, this channel is perfect for you. So the hate for lands stems from the social implication of lands being untouchable, which coincided with the rise of ramp strategies. Big green decks hide behind the 40 life barrier and the use of politics to carry them through their power vacuum in the early game, and overwhelms the table with inevitability later on. And it seems they're not taking their foot off the pedal in terms of design either, starting with Tayova being an early slip perceived to be a giant middle finger to the players putting serious effort to craft synergistic engines, just to see the Civic player outvalue them with the most brainless plays. And fast forward to today, they dug the hole even deeper with things like earthbending. The lens returning after use is extremely abusable, but they knew it, and they tried to limit the mechanic itself to once a... Yeah, never mind. Yeah. So once again, the pitchforks have risen. People are dusting off their Armageddons and ruinations, and it's time for another round of mass land destruction discussion. MLD for short. I've played and played against my fair share of lens decks, ramp decks, so yes, I know the issue. Yes, these decks need to be punished, but no, mass land destruction is far from the only option, and definitely not the best one. The first reason is the one that everyone uses, and because it's a solid argument, it can be unfun. I mean, EDH is a long format where ideally every deck gets to do their thing, and in the end, a winner emerges. But when you erase all lands from the equation, there will be decks being locked out for the remainder of the game, which can be 20, 30 minutes or more. Now, isn't it their fault for not being equipped to deal with the situation? Kind of. I mean, some decks are just better at managing certain game states than others, but every deck has a weakness. For example, my Dragon deck doesn't fold to getting its commander stolen, but my Gitrog Ravenous Ride deck certainly does. Meanwhile, an Armageddon or just a Ruination will destroy Dragon, but Gitrog will probably recover faster than anyone else. Is one deck better built than the other? Not necessarily, it's just kind of random. The format is so wide, right? And I can't deny the fact that some players actually enjoy navigating around limited resources, but oftentimes these are the more experienced players. For the newer players, what happens after the nuke largely comes down to random chances. See, this is the second issue, randomness. The outcome of an Armageddon is often down to luck, and oftentimes is not in favor of you, the caster. The ones who come out really far ahead from Armageddon are the decks that lean heavily on artifact ramp, which aren't playing the fairest game either, and you just propel them to victory. The next to recover from Armageddon is, as it turns out, the ramp deck. Yeah, lens deck are good at working with lens, who knew? Splendid Reclamation used to be a one-off effect, but the past few years saw half a dozen new entries. Now, don't forget about stuff like Life from the Loam and Crucible of the Worlds either. So, there's a chance that the ramp deck you just quote-unquote host comes back mostly unscathed after a few turns, while everyone else remain in the ditch, staring at you angrily. The house is gone forever, but the Hornets might still return. Plus, with the ubiquity of protection spells nowadays, firing off a mass land destruction probably has a 15 to 20% chance of straight up winning the game for someone else. So, because of these reasons, I don't think it's a good idea to just toss Armageddons into random decks as a silver bullet. But what if you build your deck around blown up lands? Well, that's problem number 3. It's very difficult. I mean, the most consistent and powerful ways to use mass land destruction, like we said earlier, pairing them with protection spells or mana rocks on mass. But in that case, your deck is probably just as oppressive as the big ramp decks, and arguably even less fun to play against. But if you want to tone it down, it becomes massively inconsistent. It's also extremely difficult to find the right timing to fire off a mass land destruction spell. So I'd say you need to be fairly experienced at the game, knowing when to find that window. Otherwise, people might just think you're griefing. So, you see the problem. It's either oppressive or extremely inconsistent. A newer player won't be able to use this nuclear weapon effectively, and more experienced players should have better ways to deal with ramp. They do? Yes, that's what we're going over here. The alternative ways to host big dumb ramp decks without having to turn EDH into a dice game in prison. Well, let's be a little more creative here. Every strategy has a weakness. Unfortunately, EDH is not a balanced game in any way, but fortunately, it is balanced in that every deck has to choose between consistency and all-roundedness. If a ramp deck wants to ramp consistently, it's going to struggle with gas. Top decking more ramp spells when you don't want to. How do you fix that? Well, you play blue. But then the deck is filled with blue and green spells, and will struggle with early pressure. There are very few exceptions to this. We attack them where they are weak, instead of simply dealing with the symptoms. The most straightforward way is aggro. In a format with a healthy dose of aggro, ramp decks will be in check, I promise. Ramp is only problematic when everyone is trying to value. Your Boros Eggs decks, your Rakdos Big Mana decks, Mono White Control, yeah, you're not going to outvalue Simic. So, aggro. You don't have to straight up kill them, but setting them to a healthy 15 life will make the late game much more manageable. Aside from aggro, a solid control deck with answers can also pick the ramp decks apart if you play it right. Like mentioned earlier, these greedy decks always have a certain imbalance, with lower than average card quality tied together with massive draw spells. Well, let's counter these draw spells, for example. As long as we choke them where it really matters, there's a decent chance they will just topple over. And finally, threat assessment. Sure, we can let the ramp deck do its thing once, twice, or even thrice, but you can consider this to be the calibration period. But once we're beyond that, there's no reason for your table to buy into the "I have no threats" nonsense. No, a turn 6 Straggler Dromoka is not scary. The dude with 12 lands and a full grip is, and should always be the #1 target. And finally, if you really want to blow up lands, and secretly we all know it's not even for the green player anymore, you just enjoy the fire. There are a few pieces I'd like to recommend, starting with what I believe to be the #1 land destruction spell. Not close. Catastrophe. Played in 7,000 decks only, while Armageddon is in 30,000. This is criminal. Catastrophe is perfect because 80% of the time it's a board wipe. An overcosted one, admittedly, but a wipe is a wipe. God knows how many times I've been saved by a late game undo inversion. And the other 20% of the time, we have the nuclear option, when you'll have the perfect board to win with land destruction, or someone really has gone beyond your reach. This feels like a perfect card for any aggressive deck that deploys early. One, because you likely won't need a board wipe on turn 4 anyways, but more importantly, you frequently put yourself in situations where blown up lands can actually win you the game, with a very reasonable chance of success. The drop-off after Catastrophe is massive in my opinion, but Keldon Firebombers can be a decent choice. Dropping the land count down to 3 is actually much friendlier than 0. People can still do some stuff, especially if they have a rock or 2. And if your deck has a lowish mana curve, you can recover relatively smoothly. This shuts off the advantage of ramp decks, at least for a few turns, without completely ruining everyone else's game plan. Also, being a creature, Keldon Firebombers can be blinked or copied to keep the grip tight. And finally, in a similar but much friendlier vein, Disciple of Kalis Nin. This card is a mass land destruction simulator, in that none of the lands are actually gone, nobody is salty. We all know it's pretend, but we get the prison boxing experience. It will slow down the big mana decks for at least a few turns before they're back online again, which buys valuable time for the rest of the table. Also, it hosts Teferi's protection, which is sweet when it happens. So, to sum things up, if you're looking to do land destruction, my advice would be no. Unless you're a very experienced player with a tight group. And in that case, you don't really need my advice. So yeah, this is all I have to say about MLD. I am subjective and not as articulate as I like to be. So please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you have an MLD deck that works and is it enjoyable for everyone? How did you manage that? This is Jin with Next Level Commander. If you're looking for more discussions like this, please subscribe for more, and I'll see you.